My name is Nahumi. I'm a Principal Solutions Architect at Dell EMC XtremIO. And today I'm going to talk in my 30 minutes quick talk about transforming virtual infrastructure with all-flash array. Some of the topics that I will cover are relevant to XtremIO and some of them for all of the Dell EMC portfolio. With that, let's start. So virtualization, reality check. So if we take a look back 1 or 2 decades ago, the idea, the promise about virtualization was basically consolidating our operating system, our application, into larger bare metal servers, and by that we can save space and use more CPU and memory utilization. So this is excellent from a compute perspective. But when you take a look at the storage, so now the storage arrays have to cope with a lot of new challenges as a result of this kind of change. So Pat Gelsinger, the CEO of VMware, coined the term a few years ago, the I/O blender. And what do we mean by that? The I/O blender is that the I/O that comes into the ESXi hypervisor doesn't necessarily comes out the same way. And this is because we have a lot of queues during the way, the VM queue, the ESXi host queue, the HBAs, the switch, the storage array, and so on and so forth. So now we have thousands of virtual machines that do read and write operations, random ones, at the same time for the same disk. If that is not enough, so now we have provisioning and cloning of new virtual machines that now cope with, that have to cope with the same IOs of that virtual machine. So you know how easy it became to deploy a virtual machine. In a few clicks, you have a new VM up and running. And if that's not enough, so now everything moves around. We have vMotion and storage vMotion. We have DRS and SDRS. So it became really, really challenging from a storage perspective to manage this kind of workload and to provide consistent and predictable performance for your virtualized infrastructure. So for those who are not familiar with XtremIO all-flash array that's built from ground up. XtremIO supports both scale up and scale out, which means that you can start with a single brick and 16 drives, and you can scale up by adding more drives, up to 72 drives. If you need more performance, you need more CPU and RAM, you can scale out by adding more bricks to the same XtremIO cluster, and they are all active and share the DNA and the metadata between them. This allows us to provide consistent and predictable performance between all available nodes in the cluster. In addition to that, copy data management. So one of the powerful and unique capability of XtremIO is the instant and high-performance snapshots, and they allows us to create backup and restores, as well as use them for test and dev environments under the same storage array to save a lot of space. In addition to that, so data services, so fin provisioning, deduplication, compression, encryption, and our flash data protection, so all of them are done inline as soon as the I/O is written to the storage array. So there's no post-process or background process, and this allows us to give this great capability as performance for the virtualized workload. And we keep getting requests from other products at Dell, hey, can you give us this dedup engine? And the answer is no, not because we don't want to, but because these are parts of our CAS architecture that we cut the blocks into 16 blocks and then do all of these metadata operations in the storage controller, in the RAM, in the memory of our storage controllers. In addition to that, we have rich application and ecosystem integration. We have a lot of free plugins in order to manage our storage array directly from the application side. In this presentation, I will cover most of the VMware ones. Okay, so let's start. So scaling with consistent outcomes. As I mentioned before, XtremIO a dual architecture active storage controller, which is connected to DAE. With XtremIO X2 6.1, we've announced the support for 3.8 terabyte drives. So with a single brick, you can have up to 72 drives. So you have up to 230 terabytes of raw capacity for a single brick. And if you need more performance, you can scale out up to 4 concurrent X brick under the same X2 cluster, or 8 X bricks under XtremIO X1 cluster, and by that you can have up to 16 or 80 or 8 active storage controllers which serve the same workload, and this allows you to use about 1 petabyte of raw capacity and up to 5 petabyte of effective capacity if we take into account our data reduction ratio. Okay, so if we take a look at the majority of the storage arrays today, so most of them are a dual controller architecture, which means that you can scale up. If you need more capacity, you can add more SSD drives. But so you start filling your array, and then what happens when you run out of memory? So in this stage, this is what we call the destaging, when you start writing the DNA of the data, the metadata, to the SSD drives. And it doesn't matter if it's SSD or NVMe, memory is the fastest media today. So if we start destaging our DNA, our metadata of the data, this is when we start seeing abnormal behaviors, inconsistent performance and degradation, and latency increasement. This is, of course, not the case with XtremIO. XtremIO supports scale out, and we keep the metadata, the DNA of the data, inside our storage controllers, which means that if we add an additional storage controller, an additional X brick under the same cluster, so the metadata is distributed across all available storage controllers in RDMA, remote direct memory access, which means that even if your host is not connected to that specific storage controller, all the active storage controller still share the memory and the DNA of the data, and this what gives us the ability to provide with the applications persistent and consistent performance. Operation agility and efficiency. So VAI, for those who are not familiar with VAI, vStorage API for array integration, basically sets of SCSI commands that the E6i host can offload to the storage array in order to do these storage-intensive tasks. Some of them have Xcopy, when you clone a virtual machine or deploy a virtual machine from a template. Hardware-assisted locking allows us to put more and more VMs on the same data store without the SCSI locking mechanism. Block zeroing, when you create a thick provisioned eager zero disk, and unmap, when you want to free up space at the storage level. So when we think about this, when VMware released this set of VAI commands, most of the storage vendors recommended to disable this because it put a lot of burden and stress on the storage. And if we think about this, so it basically take the problem from the E6i host and move it to the storage array side. So this is how a conventional VM cloning operation with VMii looks like. So basically, the E6i host send the whole command to the E6i to the storage array. I want to copy this amount of blocks. Please update me once done. The storage array do the copy operation, write the blocks, and then update the E6i host that the operation completed. And let's see how we've implemented VAI Xcopy with XtremIO. So as I mentioned before, XtremIO, the cloning operation is done in the memory. So basically, since all the memory reside in the storage controllers, when we do a cloning, it doesn't matter if we do 1 or 100 or 1,000, they all reside in memory, and this allows us to provide instant VM copies because these are only metadata changes. So no storage IO's capacity or performance overhead are involved in this process. All we do is just increase the journals that point to the same metadata. We don't need to even write the data. And when we think about this, it takes us approximately 1.5 hours to deploy horizon pool of 4,000 Windows 10 virtual machines, including the sysprep and the multiple reboots during the operation. And if you don't know, the VMware hands-on lab, the VMworld ones, so they run on top of XtremIO. Basically, they have to destroy and redeploy hundreds and thousands of VApps every day, and they need these capabilities. Another important VI primitive is unmap. And by a raise of hand, who thinks here that when you delete a virtual machine, the storage returns back to the storage array? Okay, so the answer is it depends. So back in VS5, VMware released this VI primitive, but after a few months, they told all of the storage arrays to disable this feature because it put a lot of stress and burden on the storage arrays. In VS6 and above, they return it back, and now basically it gives us the ability to run space reclamation. So every time we delete a virtual machine or we do a storage vmotion on the same storage array between one data store to another one, we can run these unmap commands in order to free space. And as we all know, SSD or NVMe are not cheap, so we can save a lot of space, and we see that customers that run unmap save between 10 and 30% of space of physical SSD drives. Now, in VS 6.5 Update 1 and VS 6.7, of course, VMware released VMFS 6. This gives us very cool features, automated space reclamation. So now, if you have VMFS 6, and if not, this is a great feature, so you should do this, you should upgrade. So this allows us that every time we delete a virtual machine, the ESXi host will send these unmap commands. Another ability is the in-guest reclamation. So for example, if I have a Windows guest that reside on top of a data store, VMFS 6 data store, so if I delete a 5 gigabyte ISO file, the Windows OS will send that trim commands to the ESXi host, which will send this command to the storage array, and we will receive back, we'll get back our physical space. And think about it, when we have hundreds and thousands of virtual machines, we can save a lot of data. So in 6.5 Update 1, we can set only the frequency. In 6.7, we can also set the bandwidth of these unmap operations. And the next question is, how can we automate this process if we want to schedule it? So the VSI plugin, vSphere Storage Integrator plugin developed by Dell EMC allows us to create unmap scheduler. So all you have to do is right-click on the data store or data store cluster and run reclaim unused space. And then we can set to run it now or create unmap scheduler to run daily, weekly, or monthly. And so we can set it to off hours or weekends that will go for each and every data store and will run space reclamation automatically for us. Next best practice. So eager, zero thick. So back in the days with vSphere 5, VMware recommended that every time we do cloning operation, use eager, zero thick. And unfortunately, this is no longer relevant. From vSphere 6 and above, I did some tests and found that if I clone a virtual machine, a FIN-provisioned virtual machine, this one, it takes much less time and it uses much less performance to do this cloning operation. Now think about it, when you have a VDI pool or an automated script, you can save a lot of time and performance by converting your VMs to FIN-based disk and then do these operations. What else? So as I mentioned, one of the most powerful and unique advantages of XtremIO is the XtremIO XVC snapshots. So this allows us to create a lot of test and dev copies, and if they are for test and dev purposes or for backup and restore, and this allows us a very unique capabilities. So the first one, the read and write IOPS and latency are the same as the original volume. Space efficient. So there's no metadata bloat and no space reservation or moving blocks the snapshots look the same from our perspective as the original volume. So no moving blocks between them. They all reside in memory, so there's instant creation, immediate deletion, and flexible topography, and automated workflows in terms of VMware. So you can integrate these snapshots, you can create refresh and scheduling, and self-service portals such as VRA and VRO to automate this use of XtremIO snapshots. And now, concurrent clones. So by default, when you run a cloning operation, whether it's for VDI or as part of your PowerCLI script, so the default value for vCenter for concurrent operations is 4. And this parameter even does not exist under the VMware advanced setting, the vCenter advanced settings, so you have to add it. And we found that for XtremIO, if we set this value to 16, we can shorten the time that it takes to complete this operation. So 16 for a single XtremIO X brick, 32 for a dual brick, and so on and so forth. So you have to add this parameter manually under the vCenter advanced setting, and this can save you a lot of time. Okay, so in terms of management, monitoring, and orchestration, I mentioned the VSI plugin, the integrated management that allows us to connect our vSphere with our XtremIO X brick, of course for Unity and Vmax, and basically we can do all of the operations here directly from the vSphere web client. So now we no longer need, for example, when we want to deploy a new data store, so instead of going to the XMS, creating new LAN, map it to the relevant ESXi host under the cluster, do rescan and create this data store, we can right-click on the cluster and select the amount of data store that we want to use. We can also extend existing data stores. We can connect RDM directly from the storage array directly to virtual machines. We can monitor XtremIO data stores from the vSphere web client. So for example, I can drill down for each and every data store, and I can see the DRR ratio, the logical and the physical size, and a lot of storage characteristics of the data store. Space reclamation at the data store level, as I mentioned before, the scheduler. Taking XtremIO snapshots for backup and restore, or for test and dev, we can do this directly from the VSI plugin. And of course, the most important thing, applying XtremIO best practices with one click. So by that, for example, we can select the cluster and apply all of the XtremIO best practices. Instead of going to the host configuration guide, there are, I think, 3 or 4 pages of best practices. So instead of going for each and every host and apply them manually using ES6 CLI or PowerCLI commands, we can do them all directly from here. And we found from the field that customers that applied our best practices increased their performance between 10 and 30%. And think about it, you already purchased the XtremIO storage array, you already purchased the ES6i host, so why don't you apply these best practices? Now, VSI 8. So we are going to announce a new VSI version, and this version is built from ground up, and the first advantage of it, that it's now HTML5 based. So as you all know, VMware is moving toward the HTML UI, and they are going to deprecate the Java-based UI soon. So we are preparing for that time, and we will be able to allow our customer to use all of the existing actions of the existing VSI plugin directly from the HTML5 based vSphere UI. So for example, on the screen, you can see the best practices that I showed you before. So some of them are relevant to the HBA timeout, the maximum transfer size, path selection policies, things like that. So you, for example, if you have more than one storage array that is connected to your ES6i host, so you can apply only some of them. And if we're talking about path selection policies, so VMware released in vSphere 6.7 update 1, which was released 2 weeks ago, they released a new path selection policy under round robin, which allows us to set the latency, to set the path selection policy per path per latency, which means that if we have paths with higher latency, we won't use them during the next sending of the packets per path. Okay, so this is another screen. So as you can see, for example, this is a snapshot from the screenshot for the VSI 8. So you can see here the details about the cluster, the volume details, data reduction per volume, and capacity, logical, and physical. VROps. So in addition to VSI, we have also a VROps adapter, EMC Storage Analytics. You can install it and download it from the Dell EMC site, install it, and you will have a lot of custom dashboards for XtremIO, Vplex, Vmax, of course. And by that, you will have a lot of super metrics of XtremIO. And the power of VROps is basically the ability to study your environment and to alert you about abnormal behaviors. So you have a large amount of XtremIO supermetrics, and whenever there is a problem or abnormal behavior, you will receive an update from VROps. Our adapter is completely free, and you can easily import it to your VROps. Cloud IQ. So Cloud IQ is a SaaS-based application that, of course, resides in the cloud. And you connect in VMworld Vegas. We announced the support for XtremIO. All you have to do, it's also free, all you have to do is connect your XtremIO cluster using SRAs, and there you go. You have a monitoring tool. You can access it via your mobile application or from your browser. And for example, in terms of VMware, so you can see very interesting details about your VMs and virtualized environments, such as CPU ready, active memory, and storage latency per virtual machine. This is also supports Unity and Vmax. Integration. So in addition to the other options, we have also the REST API. So XtremIO has a full REST API command. So the whole world is moving toward automation. And by using this REST API, so you can basically automate, orchestrate, and provision almost every component of XtremIO using REST API. And this is a very, very powerful ability. So it doesn't matter if you use Python or PowerCLI or any other scripting language, you can integrate XtremIO objects within your automation tools. And one of the tools that already uses it is virtualized orchestrator, the orchestrator engine from VMware, which is also free. And 3 days ago, we released the new version of XtremIO plugin for VRO that supports XtremIO 6.2. We have a lot of action and built-in workflow that we can use to automate XtremIO objects, and you can integrate this object and actions with any other infrastructure automation tools. And for example, once done, you can upload it and create objects from the service portal of VMware, which is VRA, Virtualized Automation. So for example, here I have a short demo that demonstrates the power and the use of Virtualized Orchestrator. So for example, you can see here I'm creating a new data store directly from the Virtualized Orchestrator UI. So here I'm specifying the data store name and the size. And I can do this command also by a REST API or HTTP request. So I don't need actually to use this orchestrator in comparison to the VSI plugin. And we can see that now the task is running. And actually, if I go to the XMS, I can see now that the new data store has been created and mapped to the relevant ESXi host. If I'm navigating to the vSphere web client, I can see the new data store. I can see the risk and operation, and my data store is ready for use. Protection and availability. So, as we all know, disaster comes in many forms, and as a result, we must be prepared for these scenarios. So how can we protect our virtualized workloads? So inside the array, we can use the XtremIO XVC snapshots in order to protect our data stores, our virtual machine, our workload. Inside a data center, we can use a data domain that uses the protect point technology in order to back up our data. And across data center, we can use XtremIO replication products, vPlex, recover point, and the native XtremIO replication, which is very unique replication technology that replicates only the metadata changes between the source and destination, and by that we can save a lot of traffic, network traffic between the source and the targets, and the replication is really, really efficient and unique. Another feature that we've added to XtremIO 6.1 3 months ago is the host path monitoring. So now if you have a failed path, so you will get alert from both vCenter and the XMS. This is very critical and affects performance as well. Another very important integration, AppSync. So AppSync is a backup and recovery software that now integrates with the VSI plugin that I mentioned before and the XMS. So basically with AppSync, we can create a backup policy and we can backup scheduler and policies, and we can backup and restore consistent level backups for virtual machine directly from the vSphere web client or the XMS, and they all use the XtremIO native and instantaneous snapshots in order to backup and restore your data. Quality of service. So whether you are a service provider or you manage your test and dev copies on the same array as the production, you now can create quality of service limits. You can create fixed or adaptive limits and apply them per LAN or per consistency group. And basically by that, you can control the performance of specific data stores or data store groups and set limits for them. XtremIO metadata-aware native replication. So as I said, one of the most efficient replications, array-based replication. Since all the metadata of XtremIO resides in the RAM of the storage controllers, we are aware of the changes between the source and destination, and then we can choose to replicate only specific and unique changes and metadata changes. So this is the most efficient array-based replication today. And one of the products that basically use it is VMware Site Recovery Manager. And from tests that I've made, I managed to fail over a full site of 200 data store and 2,000 Windows virtual machine in less than 30 minutes, which is really good. These are some best practices about timeout and some of other parameters under the Site Recovery Manager advanced settings. But the most important thing that I want to focus on is the specific point-in-time integration with Site Recovery Manager. So by default, when you perform a test failover or failover, Site Recovery Manager will use the latest point in time. But sometimes the latest point in time is not good enough if you have a virus infection or a data corruption, so the changes have already been replicated to the DR site. So what we've did is basically by the integration with the VSI plugin and the XMS, we can trick SRM to select a previous point in time as part of our snapshot set or a manual point in time, and we can tell SRM that during the next test failover or real failover, use that specific point in time to recover your virtual machine at the DR. This is a really unique feature and very powerful one. Last thing, as part of my role, I'm responsible for developing and validating and writing these white papers. Some of them are, of course, relevant to vSphere and VMware, so you can find white papers about Horizon View, about VMware and vSphere in general, about Site Recovery Manager. You can find them all under the Dell EMC sites, and they contain a lot of useful information and best practices and guidance, so you can find there a lot of critical information. So with that, let's do a recap. Scale out is critical, or of course when you have a lot of virtual machines. In-memory metadata matters for VAI primitives. hypervisor integration for large-scale environment, smart management and monitoring integration for your environment, both the vSphere and the storage environment. Open APIs, really critical to automate your infrastructure, recovery and replication in order to recover your data, and accelerated deployments and validated solution that integrates with your existing infrastructure and applications. I hope you find this session useful. Thank you very much for joining. And if you have any question, feel free to come to the stage. Thank you.